Hello and welcome back to Nameless Studio. I'm your host Tyler. Today we are going to continue work on the two small 5x7 encaustic pieces that we've been working on for the past few days. Yesterday we started on a second piece to go with our first, and we're going to be mainly working on that one today with just a little bit of work on the first piece. So with that in mind, let's get started. Alright, so we are going to pick off right where we left off, and that is continuing to fire this small piece. We did a little bit, and we noticed that it was a fairly transparent sort of separation, not much detail in there. So we're going to go in here and see if we can't well, honestly, I'm not really liking how this one's shaping up. So we're just going to kind of really take it into a very light direction, just see how it works. This green is being a lot more finicky than I was expecting. It goes from opaque to very transparent very quickly. There's not a whole lot of mid-range that we have going on here. So this is a fairly tricky green. So we're going to start by, at this point, pulling some of this green back away and adding a bit of texture. I use X-Acto knives quite often when it comes to working with Encaustic. It's great to be able to pull away layers almost like you never even started. It's a great erasure and subtraction tool. I use them quite often. Different array of blades for different strokes. And that sort of thing. So you'll see me take an X-Acto knife to wax quite often on this channel. So we're going to pull way away and just really focus on getting some texture and some ground elements kind of working here and seeing what happens. At the moment, I'm working on a fairly hot wax. I didn't let it cool very often before going at it with the knife, so that almost kind of gives it this like cutting through butter sort of feel. You get much more defined slices when you work on warm wax. When it's cooled off, it tends to splinter and crack and peel a little bit more than just slip right through. So depending on the effects you want, you can either wait until it cools off a little bit to get a little bit more texture going on, or leave it warm and you'll actually get a lot of being able to pull right back down to the bare substrate. Now that it's cooled a little bit, I'm able to kind of go in and sort of wash that top layer off by scraping it just a little bit. So it sort of takes off a little bit, but not all of that pigmentation. So you can get a bit of a ghosting and hazing and almost a gradient effect going on towards the edge that way, by just kind of making it a little bit more transparent towards the top and pulling a bit more away. I apologize for the camera shake. After this, I do mount the camera in a little bit of a different manner, so there is not nearly as much camera shake. So now we're looking at both pieces in tandem, just to kind of get a feel for how one is correlating to the other at the moment. There isn't much correlation right now. So we are going to sort of add some elements to this new piece, and we're going to add some small circle elements. So we are going to tape off an area to get a little bit more of a defined shape going here. Like I said, you'll see tape a lot. Okay, now that we've taped off the area, we're going to draw our circles on here, and then we'll be cutting those away. Now they're cut out. We're going to be fraying the edges of these circles anyway, so having a nice clean cut for these was not terribly important. But on that same note, as I've said before, taking a blade to wax like this can create slices and divots and sort of grooves, which can be a nice thing if you really want a defined line, because you can actually start to put pigment into those grooves. So it kind of gives an emboldened sort of line. But honestly, I do not like to have that element in play a lot. I like things to be a little bit more diffused as we get to the edges. So you have to be a bit careful not to dig too deep into the wax to create that groove line. You can sort of scratch that back out if need be sometimes, so long as it's not too deep. But that is something to keep in mind whenever you are scoring or marking encaustics with an X-Acto knife, is that if you do leave a groove, it is very easy to fill that with color and will become a very defined line. If you notice, I am now kind of adding some color to the edges of the tape. It can kind of add a nice little interesting effect of sort of hazy boundaries, kind of adding another almost plane of existence into the piece sometimes. Not sure if it's going to be a great effect in this piece, but again, this one's just sort of a trying it out, seeing what happens. Whatever happens, happens sort of piece. So we'll see what happens, and we can always pull it back if we're not liking what we're seeing, which is a great thing about encaustics, is you really can start pulling back layers pretty easily and reworking things if it's not shaping up how you like. All right, so that final circle that we have going there, I'm not going to turn orange. We're actually going to do a little bit of transfer paper to give this a line element read instead of a color element read, just to kind of break up that color in that spot, because that orange is quite strong. We still want that circular element, but we don't want so much orange. So that's what we have going on there. And right now I'm going to go back with a X-Acto knife to sort of tone down the edges on both the graphite objects and the neopastels that we used. Tricky thing when it comes to going over both the transfer paper and the neopastels with the X-Acto knife is it can almost work like a really bad eraser. Remember those nasty pink erasers on those cheap number 2 pencils that whenever you use, you just spread the graphite more so you get this dark black scuff and then you get the pink scuff from the eraser? That can kind of happen with erasing with the X-Acto knife as well. So be careful when scrubbing, because sometimes you can scrub the opposite way and start pulling that color or that graphite back with your scraping motion and just kind of get a weird scuffing. You can sort of go back and pull it back off, but be wary if you're getting a little too fast with it, you can start to get that sort of streaking, blurring motion rather than an erasure mark. And so now we're just going to add a little bit more connecting sort of orange tone to this, kind of going in the opposite of the last one that was definitely more of a green tone piece. We're going to add just a little bit more of this orange for now. Okay. So now we're going to do some wash elements with the orange as well. Again, the neopastels are a nice water-soluble oil wax pastel, so they work great in conjunction with the encaustic medium. It holds well to it. It's a wax itself. They're soft enough so they don't really depress onto the wax when being used, and just allows you to do some really interesting color without having to bring the hot wax back into play sometimes. It allows you to really leave your base layers without having to worry about them getting diffused with further heat. So I like using the Neopastel 2s as a good sort of third and fourth final layer sort of process bits when it comes to the encaustic pieces. That being said, especially when you wet them quite a bit, it does take some time for it to dry because you are just having basically water dry on top of a non-absorbent surface. So you really do have to have that, that layer dry completely before going back onto it. And then sometimes you're not even sure it's going to stay as bold or potent as it is as it's drying. So it's a little play to find out, but the drying can be a little tricky. So you do want to leave them alone for a little while. This is why we've moved on back to the first one. This little bit here that we did the first time around, despite being an orange, being called orange, it's reading a bit more yellow. So we're going to go back over this with a deeper red-orange to bring it back tonality-wise closer to the original orange that we had on top of here with the cadmium orange that we were using. So we're going to leave the top of it a bit still on the yellow side to give it a little bit of a gradient sort of movement going on, but we definitely need to tone it up quite a bit. We're just feeling too light. And once that base yellow layer dries, you can really go over with the other color quite well. If that base layer is still even remotely wet, adding another color on top of that can reactivate it and start pushing it around so that you're really not building anymore. You're just sort of sloshing two colors together. So it is really important, especially if you want to add more of the neopastels on top of each other, to let that base layer dry. Because otherwise you just start moving them around together and it's really not going to get the effect that you want. So we have that going on this one, so we're going to let that bit dry. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Idle Motor Movement. You can see more of my artwork at tylerrogersart.com. And if you enjoyed what you saw here today, please like this video and subscribe for more like it. And until next time, be seeing you.